Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. So happy to have each and every one of you back today, and super excited to have our guest today. We've got Mike Engiles. Mike is the executive manager / owner / man of many hats at Crystal River Watersports. Mike, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I'm glad to be here. Should be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And right before I hit the record button, we were discussing kind of, titles and all this stuff, and you kind of indicate there's a few things going on. One is the owner, executive manager. I know in business, sometimes owners do a lot of different things. So is there anything else we would need to add to that title?
What I have on Facebook is I'm the chief wetsuit washer. So does that count?
See, I knew that about you. Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned wetsuit. We kind of already mentioned water sports, so people are probably making the connections if they just clicked into this and didn't read the bio or the notes yet. Obviously, you're working with water and wetsuits. So before we go into your story to figure out how you got from where you were to washing wetsuits, let's give our listeners kind of an idea. What is Crystal River Watersports? What do you guys do there?
So primarily we're a manatee swim tour company. So we like to give people the experience of swimming with manatees in their natural environment. They're not captive animals. And we try to do it in the most ecologically or sustainable way possible.
All right. So, wow, you've practiced that. That's really good.
Yeah,
very
well,
cool. You've been doing it a while. You've had some time.
Couple days.
A couple days. I get that. And, here's the thing, Mike. People are listening to this from around the world. If you've been around Florida, you automatically kind of know what a manatee is. You have an idea of what we're talking about. There may be some other people that are listening to this like, what the heck? Manatee swim tours, swim with manatees. So I don't know how we're going to do this on a podcast, but help those listeners that have no idea what a manatee is, because I suspect there's someone out there that doesn't, or maybe a few people. How do you describe what a manatee is when you don't have the ability to show them a picture?
Well, it depends on if they're about to swim with them. If they're about to swim, we'll say they're a 1,500-pound butterfly.
Okay.
They're about the most gentle creature you could find. However, they are large.
Mm-hmm.
So an adult manatee is 10 to 12 feet long and 1,200, 1,500 pounds, but we have some overachievers that are actually closer to 2,500 pounds in the area.
Wow.
So they're cousins, the dugongs. I was on a trip recently with folks from Australia, so he was yanking my chain, asking me why I had a platypus on my shirt, and then he's like, no, I know it's a dugong. It's like, no, it's not dugong either, but it's a manatee. So it's actually the West Indian manatee, and we have the largest population of them on the west coast of Florida. So we'll have in this area about 1,100 in the winter on a cold day. So they come into the springs in the winter to get away from the cold waters of the Gulf.
Okay, very cool. So manatee and dugong are closely related.
Yes.
Is there a significant difference between the two? Like somebody that knows a dugong, what would be the difference between a dugong and a manatee without going into genetics and chromosomes and all that stuff?
The whole biology. The most obvious feature is the tail. A dugong has a tail like a dolphin, so it's kind of split, where a manatee has a paddle tail.
Okay.
So that's the most obvious difference. If you look at the facial, it's a little different because manatees eat at the bottom, so their face looks down. Dugongs kind of look forward. but
Oh,
from
okay.
a distance, you're going to notice the difference in the tail.
Okay. So I've heard of obviously manatee. I've seen manatee. I probably haven't seen a dugong. Is there another closely related species that someone might connect with? I know I've also heard like them called sea cows. Are there a few other terms that people might be like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go back to Christopher Columbus, when he first saw them in the Caribbean, he called them. He said mermaids were not nearly as attractive as legend had made them out to be, and that's actually in one of his logs from our 1492. No, 1496 maybe, somewhere in there. But at any rate, yeah, it's actually in his log that manatees were not as pretty as legend made it. No, they're their own order, Sirenia, which sirens, Sirenia, mermaid,
Yep.
ties back together. There really isn't anything too terribly close. Their closest relative is actually an elephant. So there are a lot of biological features where they're similar, including their memory and the way they teach young where food and water sources are and things like that. So there's certainly a lot of biological as well as ecological or environmental similarities.
Okay. Very cool. I love the story of the siren, and I suspect it's come up in conversations. You mentioned Sirenia. Is that how you say the class? Is it the class name?
Yes.
Sirenia. And I kind of thought it was a story that everybody knew about mermaids and sirens and all this, but then I had a conversation with someone recently and they had no idea what I was talking about. So is there any mythological stories or anything like that about mermaids and sirens and all that stuff, just because you mentioned the word siren? I know it's not a manatee story maybe, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, not directly, or certainly not in this area. I mean, although one of the other things we do is we do mermaid lessons as well.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. I wasn't going to bring that up, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
So Weeki Wachee, which is just south of where we are in Florida, has had a live mermaid show since the 1940s.
Oh,
so they've got an underwater viewing area, and they've had a live show going on there for 80 couple years now. So yeah,
that's cool.
having said that, we needed a guinea pig for a mermaid course, so I put a tail on and I got certified as a mermaid. So I probably have a card here somewhere saying I'm certified.
So Mike, you just reinforced Columbus's theory, or what he said about mermaids are not quite as attractive as we all thought.
Yeah, no doubt, right?
I mean, you're a good-looking guy, but
well, I don't know. I usually say I've got a face for radio, not for podcasts.
Cool. So I'd heard the myth or the story was the mermaid was this mythical creature. You take a bunch of men and you put them on a ship and sail them across the Atlantic. They tend to start fantasizing and thinking about maybe what men do when they're away from their girlfriends or their families or whatever for a while, and they kind of get a little bit, fantastical or whatever. And then there was this story that the mermaids would, I guess, sit on the rocks and do the siren call. They would sing, and it would draw this ship full of, I'm just going to say horny guys, towards the sound of these beautiful sounding women, and then they'd crash on the rocks. And I don't know what the mermaids did with them. Do you know the rest of the story?
No, I don't. And you're testing my academic background. I think it may have been the Odyssey.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know where it came from.
Homer's Odyssey versus the Iliad. It's somewhere back, ancient Greek era. Or as one of my guides so gently puts it, if they mistaken manatees for mermaids, how long were they away from home, or how much rum have they had to drink? So either one are fairly plausible explanations.
Well, they say if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. So like when you're in Florida, a long ways from home, maybe those manatees look pretty cute.
Now, there's dugongs over in the Red Sea, and there's
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a species of manatees in the Amazon, and there's some on the east coast of Africa as well. So there are some different species of manatees around in different locations, but they're very disjoint populations.
Okay, very cool. So one thing you mentioned is when I asked you to describe it, you said they're a 1,500-pound butterfly. I think something like that is what you said. But I also heard you say that when people are getting ready to swim with them, And I'm envisioning that goes on to say, yes, they're calm, they're nice, they're sweet, or whatever that maybe a butterfly would be. But the fact that you mentioned they're 1,500 pounds, I sense there's a little bit to, I guess what I'm trying to ask is this part of a safety briefing? Is this like, yeah, they're nice, but you don't want to get between them and a boat dock or something like that? Or so tell us, like, what are the dangers of swimming with manatees? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, there's really not any danger with swimming with the manatees. It's just people are apprehensive. We get folks from all over the world. Some of them have never really been in open water before. At a level, I'm not sure some have been in water deeper than their bathtub. And they're going to jump off a boat to swim with a large animal. So, people think 1,500 pounds, how big is that? Well, it's about the size of a Clydesdale.
Okay.
So for, Americans or, folks that, know Budweiser commercials, Clydesdales are a pretty big horse. So, no, they're gentle. They do surprise you. They can be stealthy in the water. So if the water isn't super clear, sometimes they'll come right up to you and you turn your head and there's a manatee right here. And we hear all kinds of expletives shouted through snorkels at that point in time, because it'll scare the snot out of you if, all of a sudden you're in the water and there's something that big next to you.
Yeah.
It's eye-opening.
Well, because in my experience, I actually managed a scuba diving and fly fishing lodge off the coast of Belize, and we had manatees around the atoll. And it was, but more importantly, where I'm going with this is we also took a lot of people snorkeling for the first time. And if you've never put your face in the water with a mask and a snorkel, I think your body naturally has a kind of a anxious reaction to that. A lot of people, the first time they do it, their adrenaline, their testosterone, or their hormones are just kind of going already. So I can imagine if you're like, I'm just trying to breathe here. I'm just trying to relax enough to breathe. And then I look over to my left and, a Clydesdale is swimming around in the water with me. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Well, a lot of it's just apprehension, right? People hear whatever horror stories, depending on the week. So they're like, are there gators? And the answer in Florida,
oh, yeah. Okay.
If it's wet, there's gators. Or, and if you want to be more precise, if you taste it and there's salt, there's no gators, but there's sharks. So depending on the people and how much of a smart aleck mood I'm in, it's like, are there gators? No, you don't have to worry about them. The sharks ate them. Hold it, there's sharks. There's sharks. No issues. No, the manatees ate the sharks. And then it starts to click. Hold it. Manatees are herbivores.
Well, you probably have to tell people that. A lot of people might not know that initially. Yeah. So, and I think there is at least one species of shark that'll go into fresh water. I don't know if it was the bull shark or something. They had swim up some of the rivers, and so do you see bull sharks sometimes even in the springs where it is fresh water?
Seldom in the springs.
Okay.
In the winter, near one of the springs, it's actually a bit of a bull shark nursery. So we'll get juveniles there in the winter. There were some doctoral students from University of Florida actually doing a study on it. And every so often, the guides in our little network will share pictures of a bull shark cruising through the spring while they're on a tour. But we tend not to put that on our social media much.
So are you going to ask me to edit this out later?
No, we're good.
Hey, and you said it's a nursery, so we'll get juveniles, but those juveniles didn't get there by themselves. Somebody had to bring them there, in a sense, right? Okay.
Well, right. I mean, our area is tidal. The manatees go out to the Gulf in the summer. So we get dolphins, we get tarpon, we get, all kinds of saltwater fish in. So could other species swim in? Yeah, but not frequently. And chances are we're not on the menu for any of it, so it doesn't matter. I mean, I was diving last week on a trip, and we saw 6 different species of sharks on a dive.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in their environment, don't do anything stupid, but we're not on their menu. If
you roll over on your side and start flopping around like an injured fish, maybe, but I don't know. It's like you said, they're not cruising around generally looking for snorkelers, but it's
no.
Yeah. Okay. I do remember I've been in the water diving and snorkeling with manatees in Belize, but when you see them, they're generally pretty far off. It's a very remote area. They're not hanging around in a particular spot trying to stay warm, where it sounds like with the springs, they just come in there and there's boats, there's people, so they're just kind of maybe comfortable, I guess. But where I'm going with this is when I have seen manatee in Belize, if I'm out on a boat or something in shallow water, when they become aware of us, they take off at a surprisingly fast rate. So my experience of them is they get spooked and boom, they're gone pretty quick. But it sounds like you're saying that the manatees in your area are just pretty curious and they'll just come up and check people out, or do they take off really fast sometimes, or?
Yes, all the above.
Okay. Yeah, so they're animals. They do what they do, whatever they want to do, huh?
They do what they do. They have the intelligence of about a 5-year-old, and they have personalities. So some are curious, especially juveniles, and want to check you out. Some want absolutely nothing to do with people and just ignore you and go about their day. And some, you annoy them, and you go to get in the water and they swim away. And we had one that would swim in a circle, flap its tail on the bottom, and mud up the area, hoping to discourage people from getting in. And if you still got in, it would swim 20 feet away and duck somewhere and wait till you left, and then it would go right back to whatever it wanted to do. So some react, and that's kind of the trick a little bit in doing tours is through Marine Mammal Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, you shouldn't alter their behavior by any of your actions. Right. So if you're getting in an area and the manatee swims away, you don't want to chase it and cause it to go further away. So, that's kind of the golden rule with anything wild is let them do their thing, give them their space. And it certainly applies to manatees as well. But female cows, there are times, especially this time of year, where the juvenile and the mother wants to take a nap, and it will swim by with a juvenile, and the juvenile will start checking out the guest, and the female will swim 20, 30, 40 feet away and drop down on the bottom and take a snooze. And they do make a sound. It's kind of a chirp, but it's not a bird chirp, but, it's an audible sound between the cow and the calf, and you'll see the calf's head pop up and calf look around and then go back to whatever it was doing.
That's cool.
And then you'll hear it again, and the calf will react that it heard it but doesn't do what the mother wants it to do. And then the third time, the female will swim by and nudge the calf, and off they'll swim. So it's kind of like I'm going to count to 3 in the animal world.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. As you were talking about, I guess it was the rules and the regulations that say, you shouldn't disturb them. And I'm sure your guides and your team are very up on that. I'm not sure I want to ask you this, but I'm going to ask you about this a little bit because I've spent a lot of time with clients that, you've got the briefing. Okay, we're going to go diving over this reef and, don't be touching things. Don't be kicking your fins down into the reef and it's not that people don't care what you tell them, but there's a lot of things going on. They're excited. So I guess where I'm going with this is what are the things that you would love to convey to clients right now when they're getting ready, they're going to go see you and they're calm, they're able to absorb it. What are the things that you see people doing that you really wish you could kind of help them not do? Because I'm thinking of the person that you say, okay, we're going to get in the water slow and move slow. And then they just do a cannonball off the side of the boat. And you're like, oh my gosh. So I know you've seen this stuff, but I also recognize that your guests and your clients are listening to this. So what's the best way we can help them understand what they should and should not do?
One of the guides puts it, manatees are calm, docile creatures, and they want to be around other calm, docile creatures. So if you get in and, you're kind of, wheels on fire, it's going to spook most of them and they're going to swim away. And then we try to do it, in a controlled environment. We have people back down the ladder to get in. They're not sliding off the deck. They're not jumping. All the companies when I got here 12 years ago, all the companies gave everybody fins. Right now, we don't give anybody fins.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Well, most people, they haven't used them before, so they don't know how to use them. So they're going to stir up the bottom, they're going to kick each other, they're going to kick manatees. Yep. And if they do, it allows them to go faster than you might want them to anyway. So it's really much more of a float than it is a snorkel. We're not traveling far for the most part. So, calm is the way to go. A dive master I had in the Keys years ago, he used to say, go fast, see a little, go slow, see a lot. Yeah, and it's the same thing on any dive. You're not going to see the gobies and the nudibranchs and see that eel with just its nose sticking out or something like that if you're cruising along the reef, flutter kicking away. Yeah, and it's the same thing with manatees. If you're nice and calm, then you can start observing what they look like and their behaviors. And some of them will walk on the bottom with their flippers. You can hear them chewing when they eat. So you can start paying attention and and actually learn from them, or learn about them and appreciate the animals and how they exist, versus purely a photo op. If you want to just jump in for a photo op, and obviously you get some of that, and we try to get good pictures and stuff like that, but we've got to put the manatees first.
Right, because the manatees, the natural environment, and to some extension, your continued business success there. Yeah. It's dependent on, protecting the resource so that people can continue to come and enjoy it. And if, and maybe you've got a client that's like, this is my, I live in New York and I've got one day to go swim with the manatees and I don't care if I scare them all. I just want to get in the water and take a picture. That's tough. And I'm not knocking anybody. Everybody, we all have different speeds of life.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna. I shouldn't have even said New York. That kind of indicates that maybe I'm saying people in New York have a quick speed of life. But I also remember when we were diving in Belize, and it was just you tell people, there's no point in chasing. Don't chase the turtle. It's not going to improve the experience. But I'm not going to say you always have one in the group, but you have this whole briefing about don't chase them, and then you get in the water and you look over your shoulder, and there goes one of your clients swimming off the edge of the reef chasing the turtle, and you're like, okay.
Right. Obviously, we've had that. It's like we hit the water, and it's like, where did they go? I know I got in with 6, and I can only find 5 people. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of the other guests, well, I saw him going around the corner chasing that big. Did they call them bull manatee? Because it's cows. Yeah, the females are cows. I assume the males are bulls. Yeah. All right, that's pretty cool. Because we're going to get into the story, we're going to figure out how you got there. But is there anything else while we're on the subject of the manatees? Is there anything else you really think people need to know? Because, honestly, most of what I've heard of manatees is about boat strikes. And I don't know if that's relevant to this conversation, but I think it's a thing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
There are very few adult manatees, or any manatees, that don't have scars from boat strikes. They move slow, and sometimes they surface, and the prop gets them. Having said that, the boat strike from a prop scar is generally not fatal. It could be bad, but think of it like a knife cut on your arm or your leg. Certainly don't want to do it again, and not a pleasant experience by any means, but unless you get an infection or something else happens, it's not fatal. However, manatees have solid bones, or, when we were younger, or at least I was younger, your bones have some flex because they have marrow in them. Manatee bones do not have marrow, so they're solid. So if a boat strikes the manatee, it could crack the ribs, and then the rib shatters. Does it puncture the spleen? Does it puncture, a lung? Right. So the good news in this area, and one of the biologists, Dr. Robert Bondi, he and Roger Reep literally written the book on manatees and studied them for 30 years. They're both out of the Gainesville area. And he said, if I were a manatee, I'd want to be in Crystal River. And to expand on that, it's because of the tourism industry and the guides and captains. We all go to training on what to look for, and the training's conducted by the Florida Wildlife Commission biologists as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists, and they'll tell us what to look for in the manatee to determine if it's ill. So if it's listing in the water, if it's not swimming flat, if it's swimming at an angle, then perhaps its lungs impaired and it can't inflate the one lung, so it's, swimming with a list. Sure. Cold stress, similar to frostbite, but in manatees it's cold stress and their skin starts chafing. Obviously, if they're emaciated. Manatees have very little body fat. All the fat is the biggest deposit's right behind their neck. So we'll refer to them as a peanut head because you got the bulbous head and a real narrow neck now, and then out toward the shoulder area. So we look for those types of things and report them to the biologist, and folks on my team and certainly all the other companies in town participate with the rescue team, and we'll track the manatee sometimes over days. Find out, where it's going. Is it improving? Is it doing better? Is it doing worse? And keep tabs on it for the biologists and the rescue team. Actually help with the rescues. And then we're also fortunate that many of them do survive. And when it's time to be released, they get to help with the releases as well. So right. It's a celebration then. So there was one day last year they released 7 manatees in one day. That had all come out of rehab. And sometimes they put trackers on them, sometimes they don't. So, human factors, the boat strikes, certainly an issue. A couple years ago, there were a fair number of mortality. It was an unusual mortality event, a UME, on the East Coast because eelgrass hadn't flourished because of algae buildup and stuff in the Indian River. Okay. So the manatees were starving in the winter because they needed the warm water source at the springs, but now there was no food source where there was warm water. So they had to make a choice. And either option could be fatal with, prolonged time without food or prolonged time in cold water. So there were several hundred manatees that died that winter in one area. And some of that, it does go back to human cause. Not necessarily a cause, can't put your finger on it, but that algae buildup was perhaps fertilizer, perhaps water draw, less flow from the springs, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's what happened. So not a good thing, but...
I mentioned the term sea cow earlier. We didn't really talk about it. I just kind of mentioned it in passing. But, one of the things with cows in the winter, when they don't have a lot of crop, you just take in a bunch of hay and you just give them food, and that's kind of how they make it through the winter often in many places. Can you even do that? Like you mentioned Indian River, there wasn't food because of the algae. Is it even possible to go in and just feed them during an event like that? Or, I don't know. Is that a dumb question? Help me out here.
Not legally.
Okay. Ooh, interesting. Okay.
So it is illegal to feed or provide fresh water to them. During that event, the government stepped in and did institute a feeding program to try and limit some of the mortality. But manatees eat about 100 pounds a day.
Well, so I was thinking about that. Yeah, okay. That's a lot
that's a lot of romaine lettuce.
Is that what they would feed them?
Yeah, primarily. Yeah. Okay. Because, that's what would be available. A little bit more nutrition. So our local manatees, where we did not have that event, so there's been a group called Save Crystal River that has sucked up the detrital material off the bottom, all the muck, and planted eelgrasses, and that's helped quite a bit. We've seen manatees' behavior evolve a little bit just over those 6-7 years because now there's a winter food source that there hadn't been previously. But the manatees would take about maybe every 3 days, every 5 days, they would swim out to the Gulf, even though the Gulf was too cold, and eat for a night or a day, and then come back into the springs. And they would make that trek. And that's how they balanced the warm water that they needed to survive to thermoregulate versus the biological need for food.
Okay, got it. It surprised me when you were talking about they don't have a lot of fat.
Right.
I was like, oh, that's counterintuitive.
Yeah, that surprises most people.
Because it looks like they're literally all fat. Obviously they've got bones and other parts inside, but All right. That's
No, literally only 3 to 5% body fat.
I'm curious, and I'd like to share with our listeners a little bit about. Here's the story in my head. I've seen pictures of manatees in Crystal River, and I imagine it being this kind of small protected area where boats don't really go in and out unless they're kind of going in slow to see the manatees, as opposed to maybe it's called, is it the intercoastal or like waterway along, which I think is on the east side of Florida? Is the intercoastal on the east side?
Intercoastal down South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
Right. And in my head, I imagine more boat strikes and more problems there because people are using the intercoastal waterway to move back and forth as opposed to just focused on the manatees. Is that kind of close to correct, or am I just totally missing the boat? Missing the boat. Anyway, go ahead.
It's a tough one, and we get into little battles periodically with some environmentalists. So, Citrus County has the third or fourth highest manatee mortality rate in the state. However, we've got the highest population as well.
Of manatees?
Of manatees.
Not people. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So, then you get into the cause. So FWC does catalog each manatee mortality, and they do necropsies on them to determine the cause of death where possible. And it's all published on the FWC website. You can look up every manatee mortality by date, where it was found and cause, through there.
Well,
but our area has the only national wildlife refuge set aside for the protection of manatees. And that's the Crystal River National Wildlife Refuge. And there's a couple, in addition to Three Sister Springs, that's part of that is a unit of the refuge, and the King Spring and Warden Key that are sanctuaries for the manatees. There are other winter sanctuaries that are set up that aren't necessarily part of the refuge. So depending on water temperatures and the need for the manatees, they become those swim zones as well in the winter.
Okay.
So, they have buoys on, they put a sleeve over top that says, swimming allowed or whatever, and when it's too cold, they take that sleeve off. Mm-hmm. And, it's a pencil buoy in the water, and they can say, you can't take boats in there. And there's some other canals that are set up as no boating, no swimming zones, as sanctuaries during the winter. If you're a resident there, you can take your boat in and out, but other people can't just take their boats in there. And most of our area has a lot of slow and idle speed zones because of manatees. So when we leave our shop, we have about a mile and a quarter run on the boat that is all slow speed zone all year. And some of them are seasonal and some of them are all year. So this area has a lot of protections in place.
I know that you have been involved in some of those organizations that you just mentioned, probably others that you haven't mentioned. I think I saw something about you going to speak in front of Congress or something up in Washington, or I don't, maybe we can discuss that. But I guess, hey, you've got a moment here. Is there anything that you wish that was being done differently that you're willing to put out there on a podcast that might stick around for a few years?
Sure.
Anything you want to say? Okay.
Well, there's different things. Because of fishing and stuff elsewhere, there's proposals floating around D.C. about that could potentially weaken the Marine Mammal Protection Act. It doesn't need to be weakened. Be careful of what you're doing and impacts elsewhere. Animals are on it because they need to be protected. So even though manatees aren't endangered anymore, officially they're listed as threatened. Mm-hmm. And there's some lawsuits popping around. The protections allowed them to go from a population of about 1,000 in the early 1970s to 8 to 10,000 now, maybe more. Mm-hmm. So in 50 years, that population's gone up 500%. No, 1,000%.
Yeah.
So that's because of protections and because of knowledge. So, there's a balance. And it supports, here at Crystal River, it's a large part of the economy. It's trademarked or whatever, the manatee capital of the world. The city seal has a manatee on it. The county seal has a manatee on it. So it really doesn't matter. When I was up in D.C., we went around to some members' offices, and, when we talked, and some of them, the environmentalists were a little bit cringy about, oh, this could be a prickly conversation. And it's like, if you talk to them and it's economics as well as environmental, there isn't anybody on Congress that's going to say they're against small businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and people making a living, but it just needs to be done right. And I think for the most part, the industry here is trying to do it right. And just like with anything, you've got people across the spectrum, but by and large, the companies are trying to do it right. And several of us, like 25 of us, have permits with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, so we can, when the swim areas are open, we can go into refuge waters. Not when they're set up as a sanctuary.
Right.
But we can take guests into Three Sisters and see the manatees. And there's some areas we can't go, but, you know, and that's all part of the permit. And as a part of that process, there are things we need to do. We have to have a guide in the water. We're not just turning guests loose saying, you know, there's manatees over yonder.
Meet us back in the boat in an hour.
Right. I mean, so...
Yep.
You know, that's right. Part of doing it right. And we're providing flotation devices. We're telling them to watch the Manatee Manners video. Don't swim down and, you know, bother a manatee that's on the bottom. If it's on the bottom, it's eating or it's sleeping. Don't bother it. Mm-hmm. Don't chase. Don't separate a mom and a calf. And, yeah, a lot of it sounds really basic, and it is really basic. But as you mentioned earlier, you know, in the excitement, it's something new.
Yeah, I get it.
Sometimes that side of the brain shuts off.
Yeah, and I think anybody listening to this has had moments where they get excited about something in their life, and they, you know, the brain shuts off. The brain is pretty good at that, just shutting off when it gets overwhelmed. So, yeah, I guess I don't want to oversimplify, you know, and this is not necessarily a place to come in and discuss a lot of politics. I don't want to oversimplify it, but honestly, the question running through my head is, if you're, I don't know if I want to use the word lobbying, but if you're lobbying Congress, or lobbying organizations, to me, that indicates there's a different side. Because I'm like, well, who wouldn't want to keep the manatees safe? And why wouldn't you want to protect them and this and that? So, but there's always another side to it. It could be farmers that are being limited on how they can do things in their businesses, or maybe it's transportation company. I don't know. Can we touch on what the other side is? If there is one?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum, right? I mean, so you've got, you know, 0 to 100 on it. I think some of it came out of fishing rights associated with bycatch and things like that, you know, in the Pacific, where there's competition with, you know, international fisheries and commercial fishing. So I think some of it came out of that. Some of it because there's a cost protection and monitoring of different things. So I think some of it's, you know, dollars as well. You know, so, you know, there's different factors. And I guess where I'd cause, you can't treat everything the same. Yeah, you know, you know, it's all marine mammals are in one act. And sometimes it's a little wording changes. So if you're going from the theory of you're trying to enhance and grow the population, and you tweak a couple of words and now it's more just preserving the population. So then you're kind of saying, well, 10,000's enough, that's all we need. Or does it need that little bit stronger language that's in there now that is trying to encourage growth and, you know, the population rebounding still?
And you said it's across all of the marine mammals? So if they say...
Yeah, Marine Mammal Protection Act's all marine mammals. Dolphins, whales...
So is it as simple as saying, if the act says we want to increase numbers by 10%, then is it 10% of dolphins, 10% of whales, 10% of manatees, or is there some breakdown?
Yeah, I don't think it gets into a percentage, but the language to encourage them rebound from extinction or being a threatened status implies growing the population. If you're trying to rebound it, versus just preserving the population, where we're at now is good enough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I know we're treading on.
And I'm not a biologist. I'm not a lobbyist, or I'm not a a lawyer. Delving into the details of it, but there certainly are folks that do.
All right.
And lots of organizations, with the lawyers on both sides.
Yep.
So
we can't say you have a vested interest in helping support the manatee population there in Crystal River and elsewhere. So that's a fair statement to say. Okay. All right, Mike, let's get into the childhood traumas and all the cool stuff that happened to you when you were young to figure out how the heck did you end up there. Let's start with, I usually ask how far back should we go, but I'm just going to ask you, did you grow up in Crystal River? Are you a Florida born and raised, or where did you grow up?
Well, anybody who's listened to me pretty much figures out where I'm from. So I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So
families, you know what? You're right. So
family's originally from Philly. So I definitely like my O sounds. So it's Crystal River Watersports, WODER. Versus water. So I definitely have a more Philadelphia accent than anything else. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and always liked the water. Did swim team and stuff back in the day. From the environmental side of it, probably my first recollection, it was now it'd be middle school, junior high-ish age, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in there. I went to by one of Cousteau's sons, and I can't even remember which one, up at Lehigh University. And I can't remember a word that was said, because between addressing college students and with the French accent, it went way, way over my head. But I've always been interested in marine biology, aquatic stuff. So that's always been in, the back of my mind from a hobby or things to do standpoint.
Do you remember, I don't know, I guess the question is, do you remember the first time you heard about a manatee, saw a picture of a manatee, something on television, documentary? Do you remember that moment?
No, I don't. Not specifically with manatees.
Okay.
I know the first time I remember swimming with them, my daughter was 2nd grade, I think, and my son and wife stayed in Orlando and played mini golf for the day, and the two of us drove to Crystal River and swam with manatees. That would have been, ooh, she may not be happy. That was 37 years ago.
We're not don't say anything that's going to out her, okay? But, all right. So, did you have siblings growing up, or?
Yeah, I have 3 younger sisters.
All right, and so you were the oldest in the family. Do you? You mentioned going to the presentation, the Cousteau presentation at Lehigh, but before that, do you remember what happened that, other than maybe swimming classes? Because just because you learn to swim doesn't mean you are fascinated by marine biology. So do you remember a moment or somebody in your life that got you turned on to all this stuff happening in the sea?
Not specifically. I had an aunt that was a high school science teacher.
Okay.
So, that stuff. And I always liked science in general. So, Eagle Scout level, etc. It was I want to be a marine biologist, and outdoor stuff. And then when I got into high school and college, it's well, I want to be able to make money too, and marine biology is not the way to do it. So
you chose tourism. It sounds great, but I also want to make money. So what was that shift? What was the idea that popped in your head? Well, maybe I should do this instead.
Well, I always liked science, so I think I had 6 or 7 science courses in 3 years of high school.
Okay, yep, me
but
too.
We did junior high, senior high, so it was only 3 years. It wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't advanced. That's not the issue. And so I ended up starting off in computer science. That was the thing to do in the early 80s.
Uh-huh.
But that wasn't quite me. So I ended up
You sound like me. You sound like me, Mike. I did computer science for 1 semester before I figured out it wasn't me. So go ahead.
I may have been slower. I think it took 2, but somewhere in there. So I ended up switching to, at that point, it was quantitative business analysis, management science, statistics. So certainly, that side of the brain, the quantitative side of the brain versus the creative side, and ended up doing that. The economy wasn't great when I finished my undergrad, so I did what everybody should do and go to grad school to avoid the real world for another year or so.
Okay. And did you continue the same type of stuff? What did you do in grad school?
So, what comes around bites you a little bit. So I got a job in the D.C. area between my courses and my thesis, and ended up moving to the D.C. area and doing computer programming for a lot of Department of Defense entities,
Okay.
for contractors there. And then kind of migrated back to the quantitative side by doing simulation and process analysis. So delving into the numbers, what's the cause of a problem, and then coming up with solutions to it as opposed to just the programming the solution. So I kind of went toward the functional end of things, the front end of it versus just implementing a solution. So I did that for lots of years.
I simplify that down to you were an analyst for the Defense Department. Did you say defense?
Yeah, and other entities, yeah. It was a contractor.
A government analyst. All right, okay.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy it at the time? Do you look back and have fond memories of that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And, and I continued to. The team I worked with, the folks I worked with, they were all great. The clients were great. But as I got a little bit more senior, I ended up having to write proposals, and it was more the business development side versus the problem-solving side of it and the interaction with people. So that's what formed the transition, is I wanted to do something that was a little bit more people-oriented.
When you were doing, because I heard you say problem solving, figuring out, analyzing the numbers, figuring out solutions, problem solving. That sounds a lot. Well, I guess what I'm asking, were you able to apply that to environmental things, like things we're discussing now, and we're talking about protections of, marine mammal protection? Was there anything at all, science or marine biology? No connection whatsoever. Okay, all right. I just wanted to ask that before we move on.
But then, I always wanted to scuba dive. I never had the money when I was younger. So I finally learned to dive. Kids were young at the time, like real young. And, did a couple, some dives in Virginia or off the North Carolina coast, weekends. And then when daughter was 14, I guess, she joined the venturing program of Scouts. And the unit was involved with scuba diving.
Cool.
So then she got certified, and then like a year later, my son got certified. So with the two kids and my wife, 3 out of 4 gave us a quorum. So then we were able to do dive trips. And
did your wife we don't need to go too much into her, what she likes and what she doesn't like, but did she just didn't want to go diving, just was not her thing?
She really doesn't swim, and she's probably in the background, and I'll have something.
She's going to listen to this, so be careful.
I'll have something thrown at me coming in from the side. She's not a swimmer.
Yeah.
So she was fine with it. I get it. She was fine with umbrella drinks, hammocks, palm trees, and a book. Yeah.
Well, that works fine. Okay.
Yeah. We were hoping she'd be our gear Sherpa, but that never panned out.
If it sounds like it was a pretty good match, because if she was into camping in the mountains, that would have been a problem.
Yeah, no.
All right. So your girls were diving, you were diving.
Yeah, son and daughter, one of each. Yep.
Okay, son and daughter. And you were still an analyst working contract jobs for the government.
But with the Scouts, we took a group of Scouts to Bonaire for a week of diving.
Cool. Wow.
We went to Roatan. We went to Mexico with groups, and and weekend dive trips. Just local quarries and stuff like that. So through Scouts, they got to dive.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's super cool. Yeah.
On the scouting vein, a friend of mine actually wrote the scuba merit badge back in the day. Somewhere on my computer, I probably have the PDF that he sent me before it was even published. Of the original scuba merit badge. And then, Dr. Talon, he actually helped organize the Boy Scout Jamboree, the scuba function there. So in 2005, my daughter and I were on staff at the Scout Jamboree on scuba staff. And then in 2010, my son, my daughter, and I were all on the scuba staff. So that introduced us to introducing people to scuba and the aquatic world. So I think the one year, it was something like 18,000 youth did discover scuba in 10 days.
Wow.
We had four.
At one event?
Yep.
I'm trying to get my head around this. Okay.
Well, the National Jamboree at that point was about 40,000 attendees.
I had no idea.
Okay.
Okay.
So the scuba staff was near 300 people.
Wow. Okay.
Just
All
on
right.
scuba, and we had four. They're shallow pools, only 4 feet deep, but we had four good-sized pools that we had teams, and every 20 minutes we were putting another. We had what 6 or 8 instructors in a pool with five each. We were putting another 120 kids in the water every 20 minutes.
So the bit I know about kind of you said it was the Discover Scuba is what
Yeah,
they were doing, right?
yeah. Discover Scuba Light.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And you were at that point, were you and your son and your daughter, when you say we were, I think you used the term staffing it or working it, were you like dive masters at that point or what did that look like? I'm just curious how obviously you were very involved. I'm just curious if you were,
So
you know,
yeah, so the first time, no, didn't have a pro card at all. My daughter got her dive master, or I got mine, and my daughter got hers. She was just 18, and I guess 2010, she was probably an instructor.
okay.
Yeah, she
Wow.
was. By the time the 2010 Jamboree, yeah, she would have been an instructor. And then my son eventually got his instructor card, cert as well.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do it till after we moved to Florida and I had the business.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I got
I
it
get that.
more so from a standards and and just owning the company standpoint than the actual wanting to jump in and teach.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let others do the teaching, but I at least have the training and I know what the standards are and how things should be done.
And that makes sense. I think any business owner that owns a let's just say a tourism company or an activity company that does things that are potentially dangerous. You've got there's real risks involved and stuff like that. I think that the owner should be understanding of what that looks like. So when they go hire dive instructors, they have some kind of idea of what the expectations are and safety. Yeah, I get that. Okay, so I want to understand how you moved from working as a contractor in Washington to Florida and doing what you're doing. So what are the like when was the moment you decided, okay, I'm done with this analysis contracting stuff and I'm going to go do something different, and what was that you envisioned doing when you were ready to go?
So I told Sandy, the wife, that eventually
The
I'm
wife,
done.
the
Yeah.
wife, she's going to listen to this. I'm just saying, Mike.
We've been married 41 years or something.
Okay, all right, it's okay.
So
I'm twice divorced, so I'm really sensitive.
So there's worse terms that can probably be used at times by her anyway. And I wanted to do something that was more people oriented. So momentarily the kids were out of the house. So we were empty nesters.
Wait, momentarily, like they were on spring break, or they had grown up and moved out.
We thought we had launched.
No, I get
Little
it.
did I know we had a failure to launch. But
Okay, let's keep going. All right, so at one point the kids had moved out of the house. I get that. Okay.
So I started looking around for something that was going to be more people oriented. Preferably near the water. So, scuba, snorkeling, tourism, gift shop, maybe a hotel, whatever. And I'd started poking around. But it was tough to leave the job and the paycheck, up in D.C. And then things, business-wise weren't going great, and there were going to be cutbacks. And, eventually I got the call saying, I'm going to need to lay you off. I'm like, okay, what date? And, I mean, I think I got that call like early August, and by the middle of the month I was coming down to Florida to visit businesses. So, it's like, okay, what do I want to do versus what am I doing?
Mike, I gotta ask you this before we go any. Yeah, I gotta ask this before we go any further, because I think what you said, you're thinking I would like to do something more people based along the coast, maybe tourism, diving. There's an awful lot of people that might be listening to this right now that are working as analysts in Washington, thinking, yep, I think about that every day. But some of them will never do it because they don't get laid off. Do you think that if that layoff had not come, would it have, number one, been harder? Would you have actually taken the leap, or would you have just kept thinking about it? But then when they said, okay, you got to go, was that like, I don't know. You tell me. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to get at.
It's a hypothetical, so I
Yeah,
don't know
I
what
know.
I
Yeah.
would have done for sure. It was, the DC area offers a lot to do, but it's a rat race, so
Hmm.
it it is what it is. But obviously, the pay and the benefits and all were really good.
Yeah.
I'm not making near as much money as a business owner as I used to make, so it was hard to pull the plug, or would have been hard to pull the plug had it solely been just for choice. I mean, because
I
we
get it.
packed
Yeah.
up and moved. Sandy's from northern Pennsylvania. She's from a rural area. So she wanted to go to something, she wanted something less populated and, a little bit more low key than, the DC metro area.
Hmm.
So, that was a benefit for her as well. But, it's
Because
tough to
here's
pull the
where,
plug. And I've had
yeah, because
peers.
here's where I'm going. Here's this, what's going through my head is I've got this probably pretty, secure, a lot of security around. Well, I don't, here's the thing. I've got this job. I'm making good money. And I go to my wife and say, hey, I want to quit and move to Florida and open a dive shop or whatever, right? And I'm thinking there might be some resistance there, just in some cases, where if I go to her and say, you know how I've been dreaming about this thing? Well, I just got my pink slip, so I guess we got to go. It's probably a little easier like to approach her. And I'm not talking about Sandy. I'm just talking about just relationships in general can be that way. And you're smiling for anybody that's
Yeah,
listening to this. Can't see it on your face.
I really can't remember. I do know we were in the car together when I got the call.
Yeah.
My supervisor's name was Mike at the time, and he
Uh-huh.
said, "Oh, I need to talk. Where are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm in the car. I think we're up in New Jersey." And he said, "Oh, well, we can talk Monday or whatever." And I'm like, "That's okay. We can talk now."
Hmm.
He's like, "What? I'd rather we wait." And it's like, "No, we're good." I said, "What's up?" And
Did you have any clue? Did you like? If
Yeah,
looking back,
I mean,
do you think you kind of knew the
oh,
writing was on the wall?
every year the company would go through cost cutting at the end of the fiscal year and look at where were numbers, where was growth. At that point, because I was doing business development, my hours weren't billable, so I was all
Okay.
overhead hours. So that
Okay.
meant,
All right.
I was now a cost center versus a profit center.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, and I had already gone to HR and said, "Hey, this is my title, this is my start date. If something happened, what would be compensation?" Because it was a big enough
Yeah.
company. It was a big enough company. I knew it was going to be structured. And they said, "Oh, okay. Well, if you're laid off, you would get this much severance and this much for insurance and stuff like that." So I already knew what would be coming on the backside from HR.
Did Sandy know you were having these conversations with HR?
Probably. I mean,
Well, now she does. Okay.
yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah,
so he called you. So Mike
it's
called you.
it wouldn't it wasn't a secret. It wasn't anything
Yeah.
like that. Did I explicitly say it? I don't know. That was 14 years ago. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Sure. You're play. Uh-huh. Right. Okay. I'll play along with you. So Mike called, and at the end of that call, and you told Sandy what was on the call. Did you both smile? Was it a mixed? Were you smiling? She was crying. Was she smiling? You were crying. I'm just curious.
No, I don't think
You
neither
remember
one of us
that?
were that emotional either
Yeah.
way. I mean, I
All
know
right.
I asked him. I said, "Well, it may have been June." It's like, "Well, what's the effective date?" He said, "Well, it would be 2 weeks." I said, "Well, that's the middle of July. Can you make it Monday, August 2nd or 3rd or whatever it is?" He's like, "Why?" I said, "Because then my August insurance is already paid for."
Yeah. You're smiling.
And that was on the first call. So, go back to the
You'd already
analytical
thought this out.
brain of,
I know. That's what I was thinking.
what's the next step? What's the math behind things? So,
Kind of sound like you'd already thought it out, Mike. I'm just saying.
yeah. Well, I mean, we had talked about it. So, and I'd already started, poking around, where were options and things like that. I mean, I looked at some places offshore. I talked to a friend who had a dive south in Mexico. I had looked at a couple in Hawaii, so,
So was
I
it
wasn't fixated on Florida. It was
okay?
more coastal and water based.
Okay. So it sounded like kind of what you're talking about. It was kind of dive shop, gift shop, maybe a small lodge hotel type of thing. And so that's basically what you're looking at in just a variety of different areas. All right. Was the Crystal River Crystal River's the first one you pulled the trigger on?
Well, it's the only one we pulled the trigger on.
Well, I shouldn't say the first because you're still there. Yeah. Was it the one you pulled the trigger on, I guess?
Yeah. So I looked at probably 6 or 7 businesses in Florida. So I flew down. I met with an attorney whom I happen to know through Scouts as well. He's a business attorney down here in Lakeland. And the Crystal River one popped up at the last minute. Like, the trip was already planned. And so I met with them. And then I went and checked out some places in Venice, Florida, a few in the Keys, a couple in South Florida. So I kind of did a little tour of Florida, looking at dive shops that were potentially for sale. And at that point, Crystal River wasn't even on the radar. It popped up at the last minute. And then started digging into it. And one of the appeals is a lot of water sports businesses are summer. You know, they're Memorial Day to Labor Day in the U.S. And, you know, when I talked to the one in Venice, they said 80% of our revenue is Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I'm like, God, when do you take it over? You know, because you take it over out of season, you've got no cash flow for months. And it's like, did I screw this up? Or do you take it over?
Beginning of season, you're overwhelmed and like
you have the opportunity to screw it up.
You break everything. So then that's your last season.
So what set Crystal River apart a little bit is it's bimodal. There's 2 peaks. So the manatee tourism is big when it's cold, when kids are out of school. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring break season. And then we hit a lull, which, you know, we're in now. And then in the summer, you can snorkel in the Gulf of Mexico for scallops. So we call that an underwater Easter egg hunt. So they're bay scallops. They're, if they're under 2 inches, we won't keep them. So they're, you know, yay big at best. And the meat early in the year.
So yay big, you said, just because some people aren't looking at the screen right now. But so a couple inches across?
At a minimum, 2 inches across. Okay. And the meat is like the size of the last digit of your pinky early in the season, or the size of your thumb late in the season. So they're not the scallops you would get in a restaurant. They're bay scallops.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously sweet. Scallops, Shell gas station sign. At every crook is a blue eye. So they have like 20-some pair of blue eyes, so you look for the blue eyes. So it's like an underwater Easter egg hunt. They're on the bottom. You snorkel, you swim down, you get them. It's not like clamming up in the Northeast or whatever where you dig your heel in the sand in the tidal area. No, you're actually in the water snorkeling.
So what does that look like? Does that, like, people just sign up to... I know, like, when I've gone, like, on a deep-sea fishing boat, they call it, like, a party boat, where you book a couple spots, you go out and you go fishing. Is it kind of like that, where people just book in and you take them out to the area and then they get out and swim around and look for scallops? Or what does that look like?
Some places do it more party boat. For the most part, it's small boats because of the limits. But we do all private. And that way, it's not like, oh, they got scallops, I want shallow water, they want deep water, you know. So we only do private boats just to simplify the guest experience. Mm-hmm. And we put a guide in the water with them. So the guide typically gets half of whatever the boat catches for the day. Okay. So there could be 6 other people on the boat, and the guide will typically get as many as the other 6 people.
Or more as an individual basis. Yeah. Okay. All right.
And part of that is just, you know, you're used to doing it. You know what to look for. You know, your eyes get tuned a little bit.
I see what you're saying. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
And it's a little bit, you know, you can be a little bit more systematic. And some people, they're out on the boat in the Gulf of Mexico. There's some days, most days, the water's gin clear, crystal clear water. It's 88, 90 degrees. So there's a worse way to spend an afternoon for sure, even if you don't find a scallop.
I'm curious because you said the water's crystal clear, and I think of the Gulf of Mexico. I've seen some kind of the estuaries areas around the coast of western Florida that are quite clear, but then I think of the Gulf as being a little bit muddy, and that's just in my own head. But is it because of the Crystal River and all the springs that are flowing out into that area? Is that why it's so clear?
No, well, this area, the underwater topography is a little different. It's very shallow, and it's a very gradual slope. So in this area, the Gulf only drops about a foot per mile. So you've got to go
Okay.
a long way out to get deep water.
Okay.
So we don't have waves. I mean, we'll get some chop from wind, but we really don't have wave action. And scallops grow on grass beds. So you've got lots of eelgrass, turtle grass out there, and that filters the water in and keeps the sediment down as well.
Sure. Sure.
So
Did you say these are all snorkeling or diving?
you
The
may
scallop
you may
traps.
dive, but you're in shallow water. You're generally 4 to 8 feet of water, so you can swim along the surface, spot a scallop, duck dive down, grab it, put it in a mesh bag, and continue
Okay.
on.
So are there some places that I've had experience, like in Belize, for example, which is where I've had really all of my diving experience and a lot of snorkeling. And there were strict regulations about you couldn't take things under, like if you were scuba diving, you couldn't harvest anything as far as I recall. I'm not even sure you could spearfish, but do they have rules like that in Florida?
Yeah. So FWC, Florida Wildlife Commission, has rules for all the various catch limits, and scallops have their rules. So there's no rule on the size of the scallop. Reality is, if it's too small, it's a lot of work to shuck it to find like
Yeah.
a tiny piece of meat. Some people get fixated on numbers and things, but at any rate, so there's no limit on size. There is a catch limit. So right now, the catch limit is 2 gallons in the shell per person, or a total of 10 gallons for the boat. So that gets back to the
I
party
see why
boat.
the party boats don't work out so well, because it's like, well, okay, we're done. And you've got 3 people with a full bucket, and 14 with a handful
nothing. Yeah.
with a bucket. All right, yeah, that doesn't sound good.
And
that
then
makes sense.
because it's open water, then it's Coast Guard inspection. Some other things come into play as well.
Yeah.
But that's the real limit, is just 2 gallons per person, 10 gallons per boat. In some of the areas, they've staggered that limit, so it's a little bit less early in the season, because the scallops will almost double in size over the course of the season. So you're pulling out a whole lot more. If you get the limit in July, you're pulling out nearly twice as many as if you got the limit in September.
Okay, gotcha. So what percentage of your summer, because we talked about what was the word you used for 2 seasons, 2 peaks?
Bimodal.
Bimodal.
Yeah, sorry.
I was thinking bipolar, but that's not the word I'm
Well,
looking for.
it could be.
For a lot of people working the skiing, is what percentage of your summer business is scalloping, or are there other activities as well that you offer?
So we certainly we do manatee tours all year round.
You do? Okay.
We do
happy I
scallop
asked.
charters. We also do guided scuba dives and dive training. So we'll take people to the local springs. So Rainbow River is a spring-fed river. It's crystal clear. It's all freshwater fish and turtles. So I think we have 3 groups going out there this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And, other springs in the area. So there's the opportunity for scuba diving and dive training. Scallop season is a big push for the whole area, whether you're doing it chartered or just another business. So I have a boat ramp. So that first Saturday, which I think is the 2nd of July this year, I don't know, whatever date it is, I'll have 125 boats go out of the boat ramp. So just 125 people paying launch fees, buying ice, buying sodas. They forgot a mask, a dive flag, sunscreen, whatever. It's a
I
big.
see.
Even if I'm not running a scallop charter, it's still a big plus, to the bottom line.
Got it. All right. That's pretty cool. So let's go back to, you were looking at this. You were looking at a bunch of businesses in Florida. You saw this when it was bimodal. See, I got the word right. It had a bimodal season. And so walk us through that. It sounds like you spoke to a lawyer, you started getting things set up. What should people know about what that process looked like?
Well, what it should look like and what I did could be 2 different things.
Well, actually, that's the value that you're bringing. What are the mistakes you made? Because someone listening to this wants to go do something similar.
So, I did that first trip, got the basics from the businesses, and then Sandy and I came down, and what we did in the different areas was we met with a real estate agent. and started talking about housing, because the reality was we were going to have the business investment, but we were going to have to relocate and buy a house eventually too.
Right. Yep.
So we did that just to get a feel for the different areas and what housing options were. So it was. So we came to Crystal River. We went to, I forget if we went to Venice or not. I may have ruled that out by the time she got involved. She's shaking her head no. She didn't go to Venice. We went to the Keys, and we went to South Florida. So, we did it as a, okay, what's our net as far as buying a house and buying a business. Mm-hmm. So it was actually a really cheap business opportunity near Fort Lauderdale, but the housing was 3 times as high. So we did that. So eventually she liked this area because it is more rural, and and the business had appeal. The couple that owned it were great. So we came up with an intent to purchase, and I forget if I had even signed a non-disclosure with them or not at that point. And started, working through the details. And then my son and I came down in, I'll say, November time frame, and did a hard inventory because everything was paper-based. Like, they had stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all on paper. There was no digital inventory to say, we have this many shirts and this many plush and,
Yep.
X dollars in wetsuits.
And you're the analyst. You're the analyst, computer analyst, systems analyst, walking into this trying to get your head around it.
Yeah. So John and I came down and did an inventory of all of the merchandise that was for sale, and it was something like 1,500 SKUs, 1,600 SKUs.
Wow. Yeah.
It was fishing hooks to 5-foot plush manatees. Part of that got a little punchy, and this is where, Mike being weird or having a weird sense of humor comes into play. It trickled to my son. So I was counting and describing things, and he's typing in a spreadsheet, and I review it later, and I see club, baby seal. So it was a wooden club for people that go shark fishing so they can knock out the shark. So he puts it in as baby seal club. And then there was a metal.
It's a good thing you didn't have a website that he was updating inventory on the website. That could have been really bad for business.
No doubt. And then there was a metal lobster that was probably 2.5 feet long. And he goes to pick it up to see if there's a SKU on the bottom or a price or something on her manufacturer. And next thing when I look at the inventory, it's in there as a big lobster.
A big ass lobster.
So, at any rate, we did that.
Bonding moments with your son.
Yeah. So we ended up structuring the deal with a bunch of different schedules. So a schedule for the merchandise, what was the inventory, a schedule for the assets, the wetsuits, the boats, the boat motors, and things like that. The intellectual property, so like the phone number, the marketing, the website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The licenses that, the government needed to provide if you were buying a business. They essentially convey. I mean, the government, has the final say. You don't own the license, but they seldom, get in the way of a sale. Working with the landlord in the lease and things like that. So I think we had like schedules A through I or something in the contract. Because there were 7 or 8 different URLs and websites and social media accounts and passwords and
a lot of stuff. So that was in November. When was your first day, like taking the keys and showing up at the shop and meeting all your new people?
During
one of the met some people before, but during
the visits, we essentially just had a little pizza get together with the existing staff. Mm-hmm. And the former owners, introduced us and said we were going to be taking over, would like everybody to stay, but, to try and smooth that transition so I didn't come in with, 0 staff. And I was coming in right at the beginning of season. So we went to closing on the 6th or 7th of January, and they had blocked the calendar out for that day and the next day. But they continued to market, and this is where, they were great. They are great. They had essentially a full calendar and trip scheduled from like the 8th on forward. So I had the one day to get the financial stuff squared away for a credit card reader to go to the right bank and all that good stuff. But there was already stuff on the calendar, when we walked in. And, and the crew was scheduled and things like that. And all the crew stayed on. I mean, some drifted away over time, but there wasn't like a mass exodus that, all of a sudden I had a business and nobody to execute. So, staff was great, but Ken and Julie were great on that transition as well, because they could have shut down marketing once they knew they were selling.
Yeah.
But they ran, Facebook ads, Google ads, or whatever, right up until like the weekend before closing.
I won't ask. Sometimes when somebody sells a business, it's based on, a little bit of revenue sharing, or they want to make sure that the person that takes it over is successful so the note gets paid off. but we don't need to go into that. I don't know what was going on there. But
we didn't do any of that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so
cool.
Essentially,
sounds like you found a good situation.
It was a cash sale, if you will.
Yeah. All right.
And
very, very cool.
So there wasn't that, but they continue. I just had breakfast with them a couple months ago. They're still in the area. They wanted to retire and wanted to go travel and do some other things. So, they didn't dislike the business, but they were probably a little burnt out.
Well, yeah, it can get that way. Washing wetsuits can burn you out. Speaking of that, so you do wetsuit rentals, or you include them when people go snorkeling with the manatees and stuff like that?
Yeah. The springs are always 72 degrees, 22 Celsius.
How do you keep people from peeing in the wetsuits?
You don't. We wash them in bleach.
That's something, well, maybe we shouldn't have even mentioned that, but I know that was a constant, it's a thing.
As they say with divers, there are those that pee in them and those that lie about it. The same holds for snorkelers.
My diving experience, I went through the instruction process before we moved to Belize, and then in Belize I had my own wetsuit, and after just a few dives, I told myself I'm never going to rent a wetsuit, because I know what I do in my wetsuit. It warms you up if you're cold.
Anyway, it's funny. Generally with ladies, but it could be anybody. You'll see them and they're like shivering, or they're getting cold, and all of a sudden they relax.
You can see them,
and it's like, I know what you just did. Yeah, it is what it is.
And the only people that know what we're talking about right now are people that have been in a wetsuit. Everybody else like, well, that's weird. You guys are weird. So anyway, we should move on from that.
That was probably obvious early on talking to me, but
which is why I wanted to have this conversation. So thanks for bearing with me. So what year was that you actually took the keys and started working?
2014. So we're in our 13th year.
So 12, 13 years. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. Obviously, things have changed, but other than the mermaid course, what other big changes do you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, with just a variety of things, we instituted various IT processes.
I'm sure,
digital inventory and reservations. Tourism's evolved a lot in 12 years. I mean, right now, I think 80% of our bookings are online. Pre-COVID, no one wanted to put a credit card in the computer, and now people are more comfortable typing it in the computer than telling you the number over the phone. Now people don't want to talk
to anybody. Yeah, they don't want to. If I don't have to talk to anybody, that's best. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And tourism evolves. We started doing private tours, coming out of COVID, which for Florida was like May, June. It was early in that process. And we figured, well, that's the way people can go out. They're outside, they're on the water, they're just with family or people they know. So, it kind of limits exposure, hits some of the check boxes as far as COVID protocols. And
they were wearing a mask.
Yeah.
When they were snorkeling.
Yeah, anyway. Except it didn't cover your mouth, but that's a whole separate issue. But I checked with Divers Alert Network on what to do from a sanitizing gear standpoint, etc. And we were actually there anyway. It was just like, soak it in bleach. Okay, we do that already.
Well, we've been doing that anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, no issues there. But that's continued to be popular. That people they like having a private experience. So they've got their captain, they've got their guide, and they can dictate what they want to do for that trip. Well, we want to
Yeah.
swim with manatees. Well, this manatee's just eating and sleeping. It's not doing a whole lot. Can we go find some others? Or, it's a little bit slow day on the manatee front. Can we go to a spring and check out what fish are there? And there could be tarpon or snook or sheepshead or whatever fish in the area. So, it doesn't matter to us at that point. You signed up for a private manatee tour, but if you want to go see some other things, we're here. You have the boat. Let's do it.
Yeah. And as somebody that has guided a lot of people, there's benefits to both. Group tours can be great. Booking into group tour, maybe you save a little bit of money. Maybe you want to meet new people. Like if you're by yourself, maybe you don't want a private tour. You want to go with a group and meet some people. But the private tours, I remember, when I was guiding, it was great because I could really just get a feel for the people and suggest things that you could never do. If you had a family of 5 that really just wanted to swim with manatees, and then you've got a family of 3 that are just open for an adventure, all on the same boat, you were kind of limited. But if you had that family of 3 that wanted to go have an adventure, you could do weird stuff that normally people just wouldn't do. You'd say, hey, I know this really cool spot where there's this really big alligator snapping turtle or something. We should go look for it.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever it is. Yeah, that's cool.
Well,
right.
or you could swim a little further. You could go somewhere because we get a lot of non-swimmers.
Well, and that's, that's because that's another conversation that comes up is either if you are very advanced and you really want to just go do some cool stuff, or if you're a weak swimmer and you're a weak swimmer, maybe you should hire a private tour. Just a thought. I could say that. Maybe you don't want to say that, but that's
every guide has had a trip, multiple trips with
like every day, every trip.
Nah, with 3 or 4 people holding on to them. I mean, literally, where you've got dad and daughter holding on one arm, and a mom and son on the other arm, and you are towing 4 people through the water. And they come back and they think their arms are about 8 feet long because they've been stretched. I've got pictures, and the guides do, and they usually laugh, where there's a toddler, and the toddler will climb on the guide's back and ride along, and the guide will be, okay, put your face in the water, and they'll lean over and put their face in the water next to the guide, and check out the manatee that way. And mom and dad get to relax a little bit and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So they can have their own experience, but it's still safe and controlled.
That's very, very cool. Mike, we've discussed a lot of different things. It's been a fascinating conversation and just a fun conversation, not just fascinating. And I'm curious, at this point, what do you wish I would have asked you, or what do you think I forgot to ask you that you want to make sure that we discuss before we wrap up?
Nothing real explicitly. I could do a couple of, shameless plugs.
We can come back. Well, you know what? Well, anybody that's listening at this point is interested in what you're doing. So if there's something you want to discuss what you're doing, please share it.
So it's crystalriverwatersports.com. It's our website. We've got Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So you can follow us on social media. We're getting into some scuba trips. We just returned from Fiji. We're gonna go and we're gonna go swim with Goliath grouper in August and do some wrecks and looking at doing other trips.
Where's that gonna be? Is that gonna be in Florida?
Yep, Goliath Groupers is going to be off of Jupiter, Florida, southeast. And then we're going to do the wrecks. If they ever get around to sinking the SS United States, that'll be up in the Panhandle, and we'll do some other wrecks while we're up there too. But it'd be kind of neat to see a ship that was recently sunk, where it's still completely recognizable without the corals and all the growth. And then be able to go back a year or 2 years later and look at the changes.
Yeah,
so,
that's pretty cool.
Might go to Bonaire, could be Cayman, Belize, other dive destinations as well.
Very cool. So do you have, your website link is going to be easy to find in the show notes. And I assume that people can connect with your social media through your website as well.
Yes.
And any trips and promotion stuff you're doing, do they need to sign up to get those notifications, or are they on the website, or what do you suggest?
They're on the website, or if you pop us a message, we can add you to an email list as well.
Okay. And these trips that you're talking about, non-diving companions or non-divers or snorkelers, are these generally going to be trips that are suitable for both types, or are these hardcore dive trips?
The intent is a dive trip, but we had a couple that went to Fiji that didn't dive, and they had a blast. They went snorkeling every day, and they saw a black-tip shark and octopus and all kinds of stuff while they were out snorkeling. Enough so that they got all the divers to jump in and go snorkeling after getting back from the boat trip. So, yeah, there's generally other stuff to do. It depends on the location and where we're staying. But there's worse places to spend some time. Fiji, Florida Keys, Belize, Grand Cayman. So most people can find some way to entertain themselves.
Very cool. I just want to make sure that anybody listening to this that's like, maybe they're really into diving, the wife's not, or vice versa, and they heard you say dive trip to Fiji. I just want to make sure that, that they should probably still go go on your website, take a look. All right.
Well, what I'd say real quick on that one is we went to Fiji as a scuba trip, but what I came out of it was an appreciation for the Fijian people and the culture. And that's travel in general, which is, why you're here.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what makes all travel kind of neat. So, I'm saying scuba trip, but what really set it apart were the people and the other aspects of it.
I love that you said, I'm so happy you brought that up, because I worked in fly fishing for many years, and I think I got to the point where I was like, it's not about the fishing. Maybe some hardcore fishermen would argue with me and say, Jason, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. But it's not about the fishing. But man, fishing for me, especially fly fishing, was a really good excuse to go see some really cool places, meet some really cool people, and just connect with people. I led a lot of fishing trips around the world. I'd take a group of 10, 12 people. And it was, at the end, it was never about the fishing. When we were giving hugs to each other at the end of the trip, we were, oh man, the fishing was amazing. It was, oh man, look at the connections we made. Look at the staff that worked at these lodges and the guides and all that stuff. So it really is. And I see scuba diving the same way. Is what a great excuse to go, yeah, okay, maybe you go to Galapagos to see hammerhead sharks, but there's so much other stuff you're going to take away from it. So thanks, Mike.
Yep.
This was fascinating.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, I look forward to meeting you in Florida at some point and getting a little closer to your manatees. I don't know if that sounds weird, but
it could.
All right, Mike. Thanks. We're going to let's stay in touch, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Sounds good, Jason. Thank you. Bye.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.